21-year-old virgin is abandoned at the altar, but the most powerful man in the region kidnaps her. That morning, the New York sky was a flawless blue, sunlight spilling across the stone-paved streets as if the whole city had dressed itself in celebration. To most, it was just another weekend. But for Clara Williams, 22, it was supposed to be the most important day of her life, the day she would become the wife of Gabriel Torres, a young doctor admired by many. The old cathedral on Madison Avenue glittered under chandeliers and cascades of white flowers. From the entrance to the altar, every detail whispered wealth and precision. Helena Torres, the groom's mother, had overseen every petal, every ribbon on the chairs, every candle flickering along the aisle. She wanted this wedding to be a flawless performance, not only for the family, but for the entire high society seated neatly in the pews. Clara stood in the bridal room. Her gown, crafted by a renowned designer, hugged her slender frame. She was beautiful, ethereal even, but her eyes betrayed a nervous tremor. Friends murmured compliments, yet deep inside Clara, unease stirred like a silent storm. When the orchestra began the wedding march, Clara stepped into the aisle. Her gloved hand trembled lightly as she leaned on her relative's arm. Dozens of eyes turned, whispers of admiration rippled, phones rose to capture the scene. But the moment her gaze found Gabriel, waiting at the altar, her heart faltered. Gabriel wasn't looking at her. His face had drained of color, sweat trickling down his temple. His eyes darted restlessly, avoiding hers, like a boy caught in a lie. Clara forced herself to believe it was simple nerves, yet with every step closer, his panic became harder to ignore. The priest began the ceremony, his solemn voice echoing beneath the high arches. The crowd hushed, save for the organ's low notes. When Clara spoke her vows, her voice trembled, yet carried determination. She spoke of love, of companionship, of building a home where respect and trust would live. Some guests dabbed their eyes. Helena smiled proudly, but Gabriel remained motionless, frozen in place. Then it was his turn. The cathedral fell into utter silence. Everyone waited. Gabriel's lips parted, but no words came. The pause stretched heavy, like stone pressing down on every chest. The priest prompted gently, but Gabriel stepped back. Then another step. Murmurs swelled. Eyes pierced him from every direction. "Son, continue," Helena whispered sharply, her tone commanding. But Gabriel shook his head. His voice cracked, breaking apart. I can't." Gasps spread like wildfire. Some guests gaped. Others covered their faces. Clara felt the ground tremble beneath her. Her heart clenched as if crushed by an invisible hand. Gabriel dropped the microphone and bolted down the aisle. His tailored suit hung crooked as his footsteps echoed, and the slam of the church doors behind him struck like a gavel. The entire room was stunned. Clara stood frozen, her veil slipping across her shoulders, her trembling hands gripping the bouquet. The whispers, the camera clicks, the pitying glances, the mocking stares, all crashed over her like a storm. Helena approached, lips curling in a cold smile, eyes sharp as glass. She leaned close, her words a knife meant only for Clara. "I warned you. You were never and will never be enough for my son." The sentence cut deeper than any blade. Clara felt herself shatter, yet forced her spine straight, swallowing back tears. She handed her bouquet to a bridesmaid and walked toward the side door. Each step tore at her heart. Outside, the air was bitter and sharp. Car horns blared, cameras flashed, reporters shouted her name. Clara lowered her head, letting her gown drag across the damp pavement. Inside her, only one question echoed. Is this truly my fate, or is there still a way out? That night, as the lights of New York cast golden streaks across the windows of her small Brooklyn apartment, Clara sat alone in the dark. The wedding dress lay crumpled on a chair in the corner, lace wrinkled like a memory torn apart. She hadn't dared to touch it. Each glance at the fabric stabbed her heart like a needle. Clara opened her worn sketchbook, its cover frayed from years of use. Inside were pieces of her world since childhood, windows bathed in sunset hues, crowded streets still breathing with life, fleeting strangers captured with tender strokes of her pencil. For Clara, painting was not a pastime, it was survival. With a brush in her hand, she could breathe. She could escape the invisible cage built by society, by her family, and now by Helena Torres. In the days leading up to the wedding, Clara had forced herself to believe marriage was the right path. Gabriel was kind, respected, and capable of offering stability. But deep down, she knew stability was nothing more than a gilded cage. Inside it, she would live according to someone else's script, sketching a future stripped of color and freedom. Her trembling hand pressed the pencil against the page. This time, no bright colors or soft lines appeared. Slowly, a massive iron cage took shape. Inside it, a small bird spread its wings, beating desperately against the bars. Each sharp, deliberate line carved the pain she had bottled inside. When she finally set the pencil down, Clara stared at the drawing. Tears spilled down her cheeks. It was her reflection, a soul yearning to soar, shackled by chains no one else could see. She remembered sitting by the classroom window, once dreaming of grand exhibitions where her paintings would not flaunt wealth but touch hearts. She had believed that someday her art would find its place in the world, yet life had pressed her into a mold. The perfect bride, the ideal daughter-in-law. Now, after the humiliation at the altar, Clara understood one thing. None of that was ever truly hers. Amid the pain, a small flame whispered inside her. Life doesn't end here. There is still another path. Clara closed the sketchbook, her hand resting on its battered cover. Her heart remained heavy, but deep within, she knew. No matter how tightly the world tried to cage her, a pair of wings lived within her, and one day they would fly. A week after the disaster at the altar, Clara decided to leave her cramped Brooklyn apartment and breathe different air. The city was as loud as ever, cars clogging the streets, pedestrians rushing past. But to Clara, every step felt heavy, as if the entire world stared at her with judgmental eyes. That afternoon, she walked to Soho, where a contemporary art exhibition was taking place. No one recognized her beneath a long coat and wide-brimmed hat. Crowds flowed in and out, laughter and chatter echoing through the gallery halls. For Clara, this was the only place where the shadow of the broken wedding couldn't follow. Paintings loomed on the walls, spotlights igniting each stroke of color. Sculptures, installations, digital works. Creativity pulsed in every corner. Clara wandered slowly, her gaze pausing on a massive canvas layered with overlapping shapes. Others saw only modern lines, but she sensed the emotions tearing beneath. She bent over her small sketchbook, scribbling quick lines. That was when a deep male voice spoke behind her. This piece sold for nearly $500,000. People don't buy it for meaning. They buy it to hang in their living rooms and impress their friends. Clara lifted her eyes. Beside her stood a tall man in a flawless gray suit, tie perfectly knotted, leather shoes polished to a gleam. But what struck her most were his cold, proud eyes. Gray-blue, sharp as steel. She knew instantly. Victor Anderson, the formidable art auction magnate of New York. The press called him the Silver Fox of the collecting world. A man whose single nod could turn obscurity into fame, and whose silence could bury a career forever. Clara's brow furrowed. Perhaps that's what you see. But to me, art isn't for display. It lives by touching someone's heart. Victor tilted his head, lips curling faintly, half amused, half intrigued. Strange words. In my world, art is a market. It's priced by numbers, not feelings. Clara met his gaze without flinching. Her voice was steady. If art becomes only a market, then it dies. A painting may sell for millions, but without a soul, it's nothing more than painted cloth. Nearby guests began turning their heads. Few dared speak so boldly to Victor Anderson. He was used to deference, nods of agreement, not public defiance. His eyes gleamed with something unusual. Folding his arms, he studied her as if she were an unexpected hand in a high-stakes game. "What's your name?" Clara lifted her chin. "My name doesn't matter. I'm just a painter." Victor narrowed his eyes, then gave a low chuckle. "A painter? Yet you've managed to say something that makes an entire room listen." The words made Clara hesitate, just slightly, but she refused to show it. Closing her sketchbook, she turned and walked toward another gallery hall. Victor watched her retreating figure. A strange sensation rose in him. Not hostility, not simple curiosity. It was the rare, unnerving feeling of losing control, something he hadn't experienced in years. Clara didn't look back, though her heart beat faster than usual. That brief clash had left behind an odd echo. Part of her bristled at his arrogance, but another part, small, undeniable, was drawn to those piercing eyes, at once challenging and captivated. Neither spoke it aloud, but both Clara and Victor knew this encounter was only the beginning. In the days after her encounter in Soho, Clara all but vanished from the world. The media continued to feast on the runaway groom story, pairing headlines with photos of the young bride's stricken face. Tabloids screamed, "Young Dr. Bolts from $1 million wedding? Was the bride not enough?" Each line cut deeper into her shame. She locked herself inside her Brooklyn apartment. Curtains drawn, sunlight barely filtered in. The wedding dress still sat on the chair, haunting her like a stubborn ghost. At night she lay awake, staring at blank pages she couldn't bring herself to mark. One late afternoon the doorbell rang. She assumed it was a neighbor or the mailman, but when she opened the door, her heart stopped. Standing there was Victor Anderson. He looked as though he had stepped straight from a magazine cover. Immaculate black suit, posture sharp, eyes cold and piercing. Inside Clara's cluttered little apartment, his presence seemed almost overpowering. "Miss Williams," his voice cut through the silence, low and commanding. "We need to talk." Clara narrowed her eyes, defensive. "I don't need your pity, Mr. Anderson." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "I didn't come with pity. I came with an opportunity." He set a leather case on the table and opened it. Inside were project sketches, plans for transforming an old space. "I own a villa outside Boston. I want part of it turned into a studio and gallery. I want you to take it on." Clara let out a sharp laugh. "Why me? You have dozens of famous artists lining up to work for you." Victor met her gaze directly. "They make things that sell. You make things with a soul. I saw it in your eyes at the exhibition." The words pierced somewhere deep inside her. After days of hearing only mockery and ridicule, suddenly someone acknowledged her true worth. Her heart flickered, though her mind snapped back to caution. "And why now?" she asked, suspicion in her tone. Victor leaned forward slightly. "Because I know you need a new beginning, and I can help you build it." Clara said nothing. Inside, a battle raged. Part of her wanted to throw him out, cling to the safety of distance, but another part, tired of humiliation, desperate to prove she was more than a jilted bride, longed to seize this chance. Victor rose, fastening his jacket. Before leaving, he spoke slowly. "Opportunities don't knock twice, Clara. Think carefully." The door shut, leaving Clara frozen in the silence. On the table, the project papers fanned out like pinned wings. Her eyes lingered on them for a long time. Deep within, a small flame flared again. Part hope, part fear. That night she lay awake, restless. From the depths of her heart, she knew this choice would change everything. The car carried Clara out of New York on a gray, cold morning. The roads stretched endlessly ahead, cutting across wide fields and quiet small towns. With each mile, the clamor of the city faded, replaced by the stillness of the Massachusetts countryside. Clara sat silently in the back seat, her gaze drifting past the window. Inside her, emotions churned. Curiosity, caution, fear. She knew accepting Victor Anderson's invitation might be a mistake. Yet it was also the last thread pulling her out of the suffocating shadow of failure. When the car turned through towering iron gates, Clara caught her breath. Before her rose a grand estate. A stone drive led to a neoclassical mansion with soaring white columns, sweeping verandas, and perfect symmetry. Surrounding it were sculpted gardens and lawns stretching far into the distance. Victor himself opened her door. His gesture was courteous, though his eyes carried a flicker of possession. "Welcome to my home," he said, his deep voice resonating in the vast air. Clara stepped out, masking her unease. She would not let him see she was overwhelmed. At the door, a silver-haired woman emerged, hair pinned in a simple clasp, her face gentle, eyes soft as spring sunlight. "You must be Clara," she said with a smile, extending her hand. "I'm Isabel, Victor's mother. Welcome to the estate." Clara hesitated, surprised by the warmth in her tone. Thank you. It's an honor to meet you. Isabel squeezed her hand lightly, her gaze warm. Here, treat this as your home. I hope your laughter will soften these halls. Clara realized then that, despite the grandeur, the mansion was heavy with silence. Classic paintings lined the walls, long corridors stretched under crimson rugs. Beautiful, yes, but cold, like a gallery rather than a home. That afternoon, Victor led Clara through a great western door. Inside was a vast room with high ceilings, sunlight flooding through tall glass windows. Bare walls stood ready, a long wooden table centered the space, easels and paints neatly stacked in the corner. This will be your studio, Victor said. Do whatever you wish here, no limits. Clara turned slowly, eyes sweeping across the room. Her heart trembled. It had been so long since she'd had a space this vast, this free, entirely her own. The next day, Clara began working. At first, only simple lines, but soon colors poured forth, shapes burst alive, her hands trembling with joy as she remembered what it meant to breathe through art. Victor often stood at the doorway, silent, watching. He studied how Clara tilted her head in thought before a stroke, how her eyes lit up when inspiration came. To him, it was more than creation. It was life itself, freedom itself, things he had never truly touched. Dinners in the grand hall were quiet. Isabel shared gentle stories. Clara laughed softly. Each time Victor sat silent, watching, her laughter seemed to warm the stone walls. Yet inside him, a quiet battle raged. He wanted to claim her, yet feared that if he held too tightly, her freedom would vanish. Clara, too, felt the weight of his gaze. At times it made her shiver, as though he could see straight through her. Yet in fleeting moments, she glimpsed in his eyes a vast emptiness, a loneliness as sharp as her own. One afternoon, Clara wandered into the back garden, stopping under an ancient tree. Sunlight poured through its leaves, casting golden light over her hair. For an instant, she imagined this could be a refuge, but then she sensed Victor's eyes on her from afar, pulling her back to reality. No matter how wide the ground stretched, her freedom remained encircled by invisible lines he had drawn. And within that tension, between control and the yearning for freedom, an invisible thread began weaving between them, binding, alluring, dangerous. Late one night, close to midnight, Clara was still in the studio. The room glowed with the soft gold of a desk lamp, the faint scent of oil paint lingering in the air. On the easel stood an unfinished canvas, colors layered and clashing, both explosive and confined. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear the door open. Only when a shadow stretched across the painting did she startle. Victor stood there, silent as a phantom. "Do you always enjoy watching women work in secret?" Clara asked, a trace of sarcasm in her voice, though her hand trembled slightly. Victor didn't answer right away. He stepped closer, resting one hand on the wooden table, leaning toward the canvas. "You paint as if every stroke were your last breath." Clara drew in a breath, steadying herself. "Because painting is the only thing keeping me standing." The space between them shrank. Victor leaned lower, his voice rough, husky. "And what else keeps you standing, Clara?" Her heart pounded. Part of her wanted to retreat from that piercing gaze. Yet another part was pulled closer, trapped, like the bird she had sketched in a cage, afraid but desperate to spread its wings. At last she whispered, trembling yet firm, "My dignity." The room fell silent. Their eyes locked, tension taut as a wire. Victor tilted his head, eyes burning, as though only a slight movement would bring their lips together. Clara felt each heartbeat slam against her ribs. Then suddenly she stepped back. "I am not like the women you've known." Victor frowned. "What do you mean?" Clara bit her lip, then summoned all her courage. It was time to release the secret she had carried for so long. "I've never been with anyone. I'm still a virgin." The air tightened. Victor stood motionless, disbelief colliding with desire, respect tangled with frustration, a storm of emotions he had no name for. For years of power, he had been accustomed to controlling everything. People bowed before him. Relationships with women were little more than chess games where he always held the winning hand. But now before him stood a young woman, fragile yet unyielding, who dared to draw her boundaries with clarity. Victor found himself both desiring her more than ever and feeling an unfamiliar surge of respect. Desire because Clara was something he could never conquer with money or power. Respect because he realized she wasn't afraid of losing him, only of losing herself. In his eyes, the familiar arrogance faded, replaced by rare uncertainty. He no longer felt sure he could reach her through force. Instead, for the first time in his life, Victor understood. If he wanted to keep Clara near, he would have to learn to release his grip, to honor the lines she had drawn. That night, alone in the dark of his room, Victor sat for hours in an armchair, a glass of wine untouched in his hand. He replayed Clara's every word, every glance. His heart pounded, not with the thrill of possession, but with fear. Fear of losing the one person who had made him, for the first time, feel vulnerable. From that moment, their relationship was no longer the same. Within the silence between them, a shift began, from control to respect. Victor had never imagined he would change for anyone. Yet Clara, by a single truth spoken aloud, forced him to face that reality. That evening, the Boston sky blazed orange. Sunset poured across the estate gardens, setting every branch and blossom aflame with soft fire. Clara carried her sketchbook to the great oak behind the mansion. She drew loose, hazy lines as if to capture the rare peace she had begun to feel. Suddenly, a figure stopped behind her. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Victor's presence always thickened the air, denser, more charged. "You keep avoiding me, Clara." His voice was low, roughened. Clara closed her sketchbook and looked up. "I'm not avoiding. I'm protecting myself." Victor stepped closer, his eyes bright in the fading light. "Protecting from what? From me? From what I might feel, and from what you might destroy," Clara answered, soft yet firm. Silence lingered. Leaves rustled, earth and flowers scented the air. Victor's gaze locked into hers, his tone unexpectedly gentle. "Do you think I'm a monster?" Clara hesitated, then spoke honestly. "I think you're a man who's used to winning, and men like that never know what to do when they meet something they can't control." The words struck Victor like a blade. He paused, then stepped nearer. "Maybe this time I don't want control. Maybe I just want you." The ground seemed to vanish beneath Clara's feet. His eyes burned, fervent, vulnerable. Before she could retreat, Victor's hand brushed against her face. In that moment, time stopped. The estate, the past, all vanished. Only the blazing sunset and the pounding of her heart remained. When his lips touched hers, Clara froze. But within seconds, her defenses melted away. The kiss held not only passion, but restraint, as if Victor feared breaking the fragile thing before him. Clara let herself respond. Her heart trembled and yearned, as though she had found breath after long suffocation. His hand rested gently on her shoulder, pulling her closer, yet with tenderness, with respect. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Victor leaned his forehead against hers, eyes closed, as if etching the moment into memory. "Clara," he whispered, "you have no idea what you've done to me." Clara trembled, yet a new light sparked in her eyes. "Maybe I do." That kiss beneath the sunset erased the distance between them, and both knew there was no turning back. The kiss beneath the sunset still lingered on Clara's lips like a gentle flame, but she barely had time to savor the new feeling before another trial arrived. The next morning, a sleek black car pulled up at the Anderson estate gates. From afar, Clara saw the figure of a woman with proud posture and icy eyes. Helena Torres. Beside her, Gabriel stepped out, his face hollow, a far cry from the groom in a fine suit who had fled the altar. The air in the grand hall thickened as the two entered. Helena offered no greeting, only a sweeping glance of judgment before fixing her gaze on Clara. "How surprising," she said sweetly, the knife hidden behind her words. "You found shelter here, in an Anderson's arms. Perhaps the humiliation at the wedding wasn't enough for you." Clara drew a deep breath, spine straight. Once, such words would have broken her. Today, calm steadied her heart. Victor stepped forward, his voice deep and resolute. "Mrs. Torres, Clara will no longer endure your insults. If you came here to belittle her, this conversation ends now." Helena stiffened. Few had ever dared cut her short. Her eyes flashed with fury. "She's using you. You really think she's any different?" Victor took another step, his gaze hard as steel. "I think she's the only one here brave enough to live true to herself, something not all of us can claim." Silence swept the room. At last Gabriel spoke, his voice trembling. "Clara, I'm sorry. That day I was a coward. I let my mother decide everything for me. I ran not only from you, but from myself." Clara studied him. The same eyes, but now emptied, heavy with regret. An old wound ached within her, but no longer bled. "Gabriel," she said softly but firmly, "we both lived in cages built by others. You chose to run. I chose to stay and suffer. But now it's different. I'm no longer a bride waiting for someone to save me. I've saved myself." Gabriel bowed his head, speechless. Helena opened her mouth, but Victor cut her off, his voice unwavering. "Enough. This is not a place for your judgments. Clara is here because I invited her, and she deserves respect." For a fleeting moment, Helena faltered. For the first time, her voice was not the most powerful in the room. Clara drew another breath, then spoke the words that closed it all. "I forgive you, but I will never return. Whatever bound us ends here, and it ends for good." She turned toward the window, morning light spilling across her face, her shoulders straight, her step calm. That was the moment Clara reclaimed her voice, and Victor, standing firm at her side, proved he was no longer a man of control alone. He had chosen to be a pillar, not a chain. A few days later, as spring winds stirred the leaves in the estate garden, Victor came to Clara. Not in the grand hall, nor in the sunlit studio, but beneath the old oak tree where they had once sat together. He brought no glittering diamond, no rehearsed speech, only a deep breath and a steady, earnest gaze. "Clara," Victor said, his voice low yet softened, "I won't promise perfection. I've made mistakes, and I may make more. But there's one thing I know. I don't want this love to be a chain. I want it to be a refuge, a place where you can breathe, live freely, and still be safe." Clara was silent. The breeze lifted her hair, her eyes glistened. It was no lavish proposal, yet it reached the deepest part of her heart. She nodded softly. "I don't need a castle. I only need a love built on respect, and I believe you can give that." The wedding arrived in peace. No hundreds of guests, no flashing cameras, no whispers of gossip. Only a few close faces, with Isabel seated in the front row, her smile warm and tender. The garden glowed in sunlight. Beneath the oak tree, wooden chairs formed a small circle. White flowers adorned the path, their fragrance drifting on the breeze. Clara wore a simple gown, chosen not to dazzle, but to let her walk freely beside the man she had chosen. As their hands joined, Victor looked straight into her eyes, his voice firm. "I vow that this love will never be a shackle. It will be a home, a place where you are safe, where both of us can breathe without fear of being bound." Clara smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek, her expression radiant. "And I vow never to lose myself. My love for you will be companionship, not surrender." Gentle applause rose, warm and sincere. In the midday light, Victor pressed his lips to Clara's, not a kiss of conquest, but a promise of a new beginning. After the simple wedding, Clara and Victor's life in Boston settled into a new rhythm. No more tense negotiations, no more scrutinizing eyes from the press. Only sunlit mornings where Clara worked in her studio, painting with all the freedom she had once longed for. Victor, once driven by calculation and power, slowly learned to let go. He spent more time in the garden, walking the lawns, sharing small conversations with the staff. In simplicity, he discovered that the true value of love was not in control, but in companionship. Elsewhere, Helena Torres still attended lavish parties, surrounded by lights and laughter. Yet behind the glitter, loneliness was her only company. Gabriel stepped away from society's spotlight, choosing to practice medicine at a small clinic. For the first time, he learned to stand on his own, without his mother's shadow. One evening, Clara and Victor sat beneath the old oak tree in the garden. Before them, the sun sank slowly, painting the sky in shades of orange, crimson, and violet, like an unfinished canvas. Clara rested her head on Victor's shoulder, whispering, "Our love, it's like this painting, unfinished, but beautiful and still growing." Victor squeezed her hand, smiling softly. "And it's the very incompleteness that makes it lasting, because each day we add another stroke." In the quiet of the Boston evening, beneath the ancient oak, Clara and Victor sat hand in hand. Their love was not perfect nor complete, but like an unfinished painting, alive, evolving, and destined to endure with every stroke of tomorrow.